Imagine a soldier poet who turned down West Point to chase uncertain gigs in the dive bars of Nashville, a Rhodes Scholar penning some of country's most heartbreaking ballads. That's Kris Kristofferson, a man of contradictions who fused intellectual depth with down-home grit to reshape country music and inspire generations of singer-songwriters. Whether you know him from Me and Bobby McGee, his role in A Star is Born, or his membership in the Highwaymen, his journey from Army Ranger to revered outlaw stands as one of American music's most compelling sagas. Today we're exploring how a helicopter pilot who wrote in spare moments became the voice of a restless era, and why he's still hailed as one of the greatest songwriters in country history. Let me take you back to June 22nd, 1936, a scorching day by most accounts, though you'll find folks who might recall it differently, when Kris Kristofferson made his grand entrance into the world. He arrived not into a family of simple means, but one intricately tied to service. His father, Lars Henry Kristofferson, was a U.S. Air Force general who expected discipline and devotion from every corner of the household. His mother, often recorded as Marianne Ashbrook in genealogical references, did her best to corral the family's frequent cross-country moves. The clan roamed everywhere from Texas to California, thanks to the demands of Lars's military postings. One minute Kris was soaking in the desert sun of the Southwest. The next minute, he was plopped into the hustle of a new Air Force base. This was a life that fostered adaptability, and it would profoundly mold Kris's attitude toward risk, innovation, and creative leaps. From an early age, Kris showed more than a glimmer of intellectual spark. He devoured books and displayed a knack for weaving words together in ways that made teachers look up from their desks. Although the Kristofferson household enforced a certain kind of rigid routine, mirroring the demands of a father in the Air Force, Kris found pockets of solitude in which he'd dive into writing. Family acquaintances from that period, including distant cousins interviewed by local Texas papers in the mid-1990s, recalled how he would often vanish for hours, scribbling lines or dreaming up short stories. Everyone sensed he was different, not exactly the typical military brat content, with forging a parallel path to a father in uniform. By the time he enrolled at Pomona College, the idea that Kris might become an academic or a writer took hold. Pomona recognized his brilliance, awarding him top honors. He graduated summa cum laude in literature, an achievement that only reinforced his parents' hope that he'd pursue a stable and respectable professional life, maybe as a professor or something equally dignified. But Kris had other ideas brewing. A Rhodes Scholarship propelled him across the Atlantic to the University of Oxford in 1958, a place steeped in centuries of academic tradition. He entered as a student in English literature, soaking up Chaucer, Shakespeare, Yeats, and the rest of the pantheon. Wikipedia footnotes on Rhodes Scholars often highlight that Kris didn't just read dusty tomes. He also joined the university's boxing team, eventually captaining it. You can imagine the scene: an American with a gentle drawl duking it out in a British ring, balancing a Canterbury Tales essay by day and a pair of boxing gloves by night. According to a snippet from Rolling Stone in a 1971 feature, Kris described Oxford as a place that sharpened my mind and taught me to see the poetry in everything. Another anecdote from an NPR interview decades later revealed he found that dual life exhilarating, academia fueling his sense of language, sports fueling his competitive edge. He started writing songs, or at least verses that might later morph into songs, though back then he had no illusions about becoming a musician. At best, he imagined himself penning short stories or novels. In 1960, fresh out of Oxford, Kris found himself at a crossroads. The U.S. Army offered a path that seemed like a natural extension of his father's legacy, so he joined up. He completed Ranger School, no small feat, and learned to pilot helicopters, eventually stationed in Germany. People in the ranks saw him as an odd combination of soldier, poet, and philosopher, always scribbling lines in notebooks whenever a break appeared. But as the early 60s progressed, Kris started feeling the pull of music in a more urgent way. According to a 1971 Rolling Stone piece, he received an invitation to teach literature at West Point around 1965, an offer that would have made many a father proud. Instead, Kris shocked his family by flatly turning it down. He announced he was heading to Nashville to chase a dream that was barely formed but exhilarating nonetheless. That decision, according to various interviews Kris gave over the years, caused a deep rift with his father. The elder Kristofferson had envisioned a legacy of military distinction, and the notion of his brilliant son throwing away an Army career to go mingle with honky-tonk drifters in Nashville was unthinkable. Kris explained in a 1990 feature in Country Weekly that his father's silent disappointment hung over him for years, culminating in a near estrangement. In 1980, his dad passed away, and Kris carried lingering regret that they never fully reconciled. Yet he also knew he owed his unwavering drive to the discipline and ambition instilled by that same father. Arriving in Nashville in the mid-1960s, Kris was no starry-eyed kid. He'd been around the world, survived Ranger School, studied at Oxford, but none of that prevented him from having to start at the bottom. He took whatever job let him keep writing songs. One day, he'd be a janitor in a recording studio, soaking in the atmosphere of session musicians. Another day, he'd be out in the Gulf of Mexico flying helicopters to oil rigs. That second gig made headlines, especially when curious onlookers realized the pilot was a Rhodes Scholar who'd turned down West Point. Kris joked that the only thing that made sense was that it paid enough to keep him afloat while he pitched songs door to door. He must have been quite a sight, this polite yet determined fellow, with a stack of lyrics he believed in. By 1965, Columbia Records had taken some notice, though his earliest forays yielded modest results. Vietnam Blues, a track performed by Dave Dudley in 1966, climbed to number 12 on the country charts, the first hint that Kristofferson's brand of narrative lyricism resonated. The style was raw, honest, unafraid to tackle social or emotional complexities, a reflection of that Oxford mind grappling with the real world. People in the Nashville scene started whispering about this ex-Army pilot who wrote like a poet. However, consistent success proved elusive. From about 1967 to 1969, Kris churned out songs that circled around the edges of recognition, but never quite broke out. He recalled in a 1970s TV interview that he was living in a rundown apartment, occasionally skipping meals, convinced that someday a bigger break would come. That break arrived in the most spectacular fashion toward the end of the decade. He wrote Sunday Morning Comin' Down, a track that captured the hungover emptiness of a weekend morning. Johnny Cash took it to number 1 in 1970, famously introducing it on national television. Suddenly, Kris Kristofferson's name was on everyone's lips. Next came Me and Bobby McGee, which Janis Joplin immortalized in a version that soared to number 1 on the pop charts in 1971, released just after her tragic death. Add Help Me Make It Through the Night, a Sammy Smith rendition that also dominated country radio. Within a short window, Kris had penned multiple songs that not only topped charts but became generational anthems. Critics and fans alike marveled at how a single songwriter was simultaneously guiding iconic hits in both country and pop realms. For an aspiring musician living on scraps just a couple of years earlier, it felt like a rocket ride. By 1970, Kris decided to step out from behind the scenes and record his own material. Monument Records gave him that shot. The resulting album, simply called Kristofferson, initially flopped from a commercial standpoint, but in the track list was Me and Bobby McGee, which proved gold for other artists. As the album gradually got reissued and discovered, people recognized the singular voice he brought, rough around the edges, poetic in its wordplay, and distinctly different from the polished Nashville sound. Many in the scene branded him as part of the outlaw country movement. Even if he didn't initially set out to be a rebel, he simply had a knack for telling stories in a plain-spoken style that defied the mainstream's typical saccharine love songs. In 1971, Kristofferson followed up with The Silver-Tongued Devil and I, hitting number 4 on the country charts. The single Lovin' Her Was Easier might not have topped the charts, but it further established his introspective, often philosophical take on relationships. Meanwhile, he garnered the kind of respect that lands you an invitation to the Grand Ole Opry, which he joined in 1973. It was somewhat rare for an artist labeled Outlaw to also be embraced by the Opry, known for tradition. Yet that dual acceptance highlighted his unique position. He was both an outsider to the Nashville establishment and someone they begrudgingly recognized as a genius. Around 1972 to 1973, Kris began flirting with Hollywood. Cisco Pike, 1972, was a small start. Then he appeared as Billy the Kid in Sam Peckinpah's Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, 1973. Neither film skyrocketed him to immediate stardom, but it laid the groundwork. Then came A Star Is Born in 1976, starring Barbra Streisand. This was the game changer. The film raked in around $80 million, a huge sum at the time, and Kris nabbed a Golden Globe for Best Actor in 1977. Suddenly, he was more than a critically lauded songwriter. He was a box office draw. The success also catapulted him into an intense lifestyle, mixing with Hollywood parties, heightened media attention, and big studio offers. But not all his movie choices panned out. Convoy, 1978, became a cult favorite for some, while Heaven's Gate, 1980, turned into a notorious box office disaster, tarnishing his film prospects for a while. Later, he'd appear in the Blade franchise, starting in 1998, surprising fans who never expected him in a comic-based action role. Over the decades, he showed he could be comedic, dramatic, or downright menacing as needed. A parallel track for Kris was his deep involvement with the outlaw side of country, culminating in the Highwaymen Project with Willie Nelson, Johnny Cash, and Waylon Jennings. That supergroup's 1985 album Highwayman soared to number 1, powered by the single Highwayman, also topping the charts. They continued collaborating, and fans cherished the raw synergy of 4 icons who had each broken Nashville rules. Rolling Stone once labeled them the Mount Rushmore of outlaw country, a moniker that stuck. The Highwaymen tours were legendary for the camaraderie and sometimes the chaos on stage. Meanwhile, life off stage was no breezy affair. Kris had married Fran Beer in 1960, fathering 2 children, Tracy, born 1962, and Kris, born 1968. That union crumbled in 1969, as the strain of his Nashville struggles weighed heavily. In 1973, he wed singer Rita Coolidge, forming a high-profile musical duo that garnered a Grammy for their track From the Bottle to the Bottom, 1974. They had a daughter, Casey, born 1974, but the marriage foundered in 1980 amid issues with substance abuse and conflicting artistic directions. Kris had always been candid about his struggles with drugs and alcohol, saying in various interviews, like one with People magazine in 1983, that the success of A Star is Born escalated his usage of heroin, cocaine, and heavy drinking. By 1980, he recognized the need for rehab. Lisa Myers, whom he married in 1983, played a significant role in helping him straighten out. They remained together for 41 years, raising 5 children: Jesse born 1984, Jody born 1985, Johnny born 1988, Kelly Marie born 1990, and Blake born 1994. Kris would joke in a 2013 NPR feature that he gave up heroin and cocaine but still smoked pot occasionally, well into his 70s, describing it as a lesser evil. Career-wise, from the 1980s onward, Kris's chart presence waned. The mainstream country scene pivoted more toward pop-leaning acts, relegating Kris's introspective style to the fringes. Yet he never disappeared. He played countless live shows, continued releasing albums at a slower pace, and often guested on friends' records. By 2004, the Country Music Hall of Fame honored him for his transformative impact. That same year, or near it, he began focusing on stripped-down confessional albums like This Old Road, 2006, and Closer to the Bone, 2009. Critics loved the raw honesty. These records felt like letters from a wise elder statesman who'd lived 1,000 lives. In 2013, doctors initially misdiagnosed him with Alzheimer's, but a deeper look revealed he had Lyme disease. Treatments reportedly restored much of his memory, and though he still performed, it was evident the road had taken a toll. Another highlight came in 2016 with the Cedar Creek Sessions, which earned a Grammy nod and showcased his unyielding passion for songwriting. By 2020, at the age of 84, Kris decided it was time to retire from touring life, playing a final show at Austin City Limits. He told fans he was grateful for the decades of support, but he wanted to devote himself more fully to family, especially as health concerns became trickier. On September 28, 2024, Kris passed away peacefully at home in Maui, Hawaii, at age 88. Family statements to the Associated Press 2024 confirmed it was natural causes, a gentle end for a man whose life had encompassed military service, academic brilliance, songwriting fame, film stardom, battles with addiction, and fatherhood to 8 children. True to his musical roots, he was cremated, and the family scattered his ashes in Nashville, acknowledging that city as his spiritual home. Within days, Willie Nelson, Roseanne Cash, and a host of luminaries gathered at the Grand Ole Opry for a heartfelt tribute, sharing stories about Kris's kindness and rebellious streak. The Pilgrim, a biopic about his life, was already in pre-production for a 2025 release, with PBS announcing a companion documentary, Kris Kristofferson, Poet of the Outlaws. Both projects are expected to draw fresh attention to his extraordinary life. Numbers might not fully capture his influence, but the stats remain impressive. 18 singles on the country charts, even if none reached number 1 as a solo performer. 3 million records sold, 4 Grammys, including Best Country Song for Help Me Make It Through the Night in 1972. Membership in the Country Music Hall of Fame since 2004. But the real story is how he rewrote the rulebook for what a country musician could be. A poet armed with a battered guitar, an Army Ranger who quit a promising military future, a Rhodes Scholar who sang about heartbreak, regret, and the messy corners of American life. He opened the door for future singer-songwriters unafraid to address deeper topics, interviews with modern artists from Willie's Kid Rock blog references in 2012 To Casey Musgraves' Rolling Stone comments in 2015, repeatedly name-checked Kris as a giant, overshadowing them all. His songwriting style blended a literary sensibility gleaned from Oxford with the straightforward grit of honky tonk. He tackled social issues like the Vietnam War or spiritual disillusion, often in subtle ways. Rolling Stone's 1971 profile labeled him the storytelling sage, praising how he'd put personal experience front and center, occasionally risking commercial viability. Me and Bobby McGee remains an anthem bridging country, rock, and folk. Sunday Morning Comin' Down set the template for countless confessional tracks about emptiness and redemption. Then there's Help Me Make It Through the Night, a timeless plea for human connection. Generations later, younger fans discover these songs and marvel at how modern they sound in their frankness.